On a cold autumn morning in St. Petersburg, when the golden rays of the sun barely touched the snow-covered roofs of historical buildings, a new student arrived at one of the capital's prestigious schools. Her name was Jamilia Abdullah, and her appearance caused a mixed reaction among both teachers and students. Born in a small town in Nigeria, Jamilia dreamed of more from an early age, and luck smiled upon her. Talent, perseverance, and a scholarship allowed her to continue her education at one of the best educational institutions in Russia. The first days at school were filled with a mixture of excitement, joy, and anxiety. Jamilia tried to adapt to the new culture, listened attentively to her peers' stories about the traditions and customs of St. Petersburg, trying to find a common language with her classmates. However, behind the bright facade of noble intentions lurked a shadow of prejudice. Already at the threshold of the school, some students exchanged whispers, and the gaze of senior students was filled with mistrust and coldness. In the corridors, where laughter and lively communication always sounded, suddenly silence fell when Jamilia passed by. A little later, in the cozy office of the literature teacher, where the walls were decorated with portraits of great writers, Jamilia met Mrs. Elena Petrovna, a woman with soft eyes and a kind voice. Mrs. Petrovna greeted the newcomer with a warm smile, trying to create an atmosphere of support and understanding for her. However, even here, where attention and care were expected, there was an invisible barrier. Not all colleagues and students shared her sympathy and respect. During the first weeks, Jamilia attended classes, trying not to stand out from the crowd to avoid unnecessary attention. She was interested in literature, dreaming of one day writing a book in which she would tell about the fight against injustice, about her trials and triumphs. Her diary was filled with sincere entries, reflecting both the joy of discovering a new world and the shadow of loneliness. Every evening, returning to the dorm, she felt her heart fill with hope, but at the same time, anxiety for the future, in which she had to prove her worth. One day, after a long history lesson discussing the fateful events of past eras, Jamilia walked out of the classroom and ran into a group of classmates in the school hallway. She noticed a slight but obvious disgust in their eyes. Someone quietly uttered an offensive word behind her back, hinting at her origins, and another smirked, as if knowing that she was an outsider in this world. These fleeting moments of unspoken hatred pierced the thin shell of her confidence. She tried to remain silent, but a sense of injustice was accumulating in her soul, which seemed to grow to unrecognizable proportions with each passing day. In a conversation with her dorm friend Marina, Jamilia tried to share her experiences. Marina, a descendant of an intelligent family accustomed to the traditions and norms of St. Petersburg, listened attentively. But her words of comfort sounded as if she did not fully understand the depth of the pain that the new student was experiencing. "Everything will pass," Marina assured. "You will prove that you have inner strength and dignity." But for Jamilia, words of comfort were only a weak antidote to the constant feeling of loneliness and misunderstanding. This school, built on centuries of tradition and ideals, was gradually beginning to show its two-faced nature. On the one hand, high educational standards; on the other, hidden hostility and prejudice that many students passed down from generation to generation. Jamilia felt an invisible wall of prejudice gradually shrinking around her, like a labyrinth with no way out. In her eyes, full of dreams and ambitions, shadows of doubt increasingly flickered. Would she be able to withstand this cold world, where every little thing could become a reason for ridicule and humiliation? During these first days of the school year, Jamilia tried to concentrate on her studies, working hard on assignments and trying to earn the respect of her teachers. But even in the room where great works of Russian literature were being discussed, she noticed that some of the words and views addressed to her person were laced with hidden contempt. Despite Mrs. Petrovna's visible support, she knew that she would have to fight not only for her knowledge, but also for her dignity in an environment where indifference and prejudice could deal an irreparable blow to self-esteem. The first confrontations, though not so pronounced, foreshadowed the trials to come. Jamilia understood that the path ahead would not be easy, and deep down she was already preparing herself for the fact that her talent and desire for excellence would be tested not only academically, but also in the struggle for the right to be herself. This autumn was the beginning of her great trial, a trial in which she had to confront not only external insults, but also her own fears in order to gain a true understanding of strength and freedom. Several weeks had passed since Jamilia had first stepped foot at school. At first, everything seemed to be going relatively smoothly. Lessons, club activities, conversations with new acquaintances. But the silence with which she had met the first signs of hostility quickly turned into a deafening roar of negativity. One rainy autumn day, when the sky was covered with gray clouds, the resentment and prejudice hidden behind friendly smiles surfaced with renewed vigor. In the schoolyard, where children's laughter and cheerful voices usually sounded, Jamilia found herself in the middle of an ominous scene. Several students, led by a charismatic but cruel teenager named Igor, gathered in a small circle. Their gazes, filled with glee and contempt, were directed at the new girl. Igor, known for his penchant for provocation, said something that immediately caused indignation among those around him. He mocked Jamilia's accent, distorting her name in a crude mockery. This petty mockery was the first drop, which soon grew into a real waterfall of aggression. That same day, during a break, one of the students who had to prove his seriousness approached Jamilia and, without hiding his malice, suggested that she demonstrate her fragility by talking about her appearance and habits. The conversation quickly turned to ridicule, and suddenly someone from the group took a pair of scissors out of his bag, as if intending to do something forbidden. Jamilia's gaze, full of growing anxiety, met the cold gleam of the instrument. At that moment, time seemed to slow down. The students around felt the moment when an innocent desire for self-affirmation collides with cruelty and prejudice. A strong gust of wind seemed to bring with it the voices of mockery and derision. Igor and his companions, surrounded by an atmosphere of sinister merriment, seized the scissors and approached Jamilia without warning. She tried to retreat, but the crowd pressed, and her voice, full of determination and fear, died away under the onslaught of collective hostility. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Show us how you can be like everyone else." And at that moment the scissors, cold and shiny, appeared in the hands of the offender. In front of everyone, in the very center of the schoolyard, the scissors cut through the space with a clanging sound, and with each passing second, something happened that left a deep wound in Jamilia's soul. She didn't have time to realize what was happening when her thick, black hair ended up under the knife. With each passing second, her hair, a symbol of her uniqueness and part of her identity, fell onto the cold asphalt like black leaves in an autumn garden, deprived of life. This gesture, filled with rudeness and heartlessness, became more than just a physical act. It turned into a symbol of the destruction of her inner harmony and confidence. The crowd around her exploded in a mixture of laughter and screams, and the look of shock and pain in Jamilia's eyes told her that this moment would be etched in her memory forever. She tried to defend herself, but the physical strength and aggressive behavior of her classmates were too powerful. In that moment, it seemed to her that the whole world had turned against her, and the school that she had thought of as a place of knowledge and hope had become an arena for cruel games and mockery. The teachers, seemingly frozen in their guesses about what was happening, merely watched from the sidelines. One of the teachers tried to approach, but his words of comfort were drowned out by the chaos of mockery and shouts. Memories of the first days, when Jamilia dreamed of new knowledge and friendship, began to fade under the onslaught of cruelty, giving her no chance for protection or consolation. Every second seemed like an eternity, in which the girl tried to keep her cool, but inside everything was seething: fear, bitterness, and pain that could not be expressed in words. When the offenders finally left, leaving Jamilia alone in the rainy courtyard, she felt cold shivers run through her body. A spark of unconquered will flashed in her eyes, and despite the unbearable pain, she managed to gather the strength to step aside. The rain that began to pour from the sky washed away the bloody traces on the asphalt, but the wound in her soul remained incurable. Each drop seemed to be the embodiment of resentment, a reminder that her uniqueness had become a target for someone else's cruelty. That evening, back in her dorm, Jamilia couldn't sleep. Her thoughts wandered between pain and determination. She knew she couldn't stand aside any longer, that she had to find the strength to stand up to injustice, and that her life would never be the same again. New lines appeared in her diary, lines about pain, about courage, about how injustice cannot be left unpunished. Each word conveyed a deep inner struggle, a struggle to be heard and to preserve her own dignity. Thus, this incident became a turning point in Jamilia's life, the moment when she first encountered the ruthless reality in which indifference and prejudice were transformed into weapons of humiliation. This experience, painful and devastating, became a catalyst for change, forcing her to wonder how much longer she could tolerate the insults, and when the moment would come when she would meet all the challenges of fate with her firm determination. After the incident in the schoolyard left an indelible mark on Jamilia's soul, her inner world underwent a radical change. Every minute, every look, and every word said about her appearance poisoned her thoughts, but at the same time ignited a spark of resistance. In the twilight of autumn days, Jamilia began to realize she could no longer be a passive victim. The time had come to stand up for herself and prove that her uniqueness was a strength, not a weakness. In the first days after the tragic incident, Jamilia immersed herself in thoughts about the meaning of her own existence in this cold and merciless world. She spent long hours in the library, studying the lives of great personalities who, despite all the trials, did not give up. She was inspired by stories about those who managed to overcome prejudices and prove that true strength is born in struggle. Every page she read, every story about overcoming obstacles became lessons in courage and an unconquered spirit for her. At the same time, Jamilia began to observe the behavior of her classmates and teachers, trying to understand how exactly the atmosphere of indifference reigned at school. Conversations behind her back, looks of obvious contempt, even minor trifles, all this added up to a general picture of social injustice. She noted how some teachers, having witnessed humiliation, preferred to remain silent, fearing to violate the established order, and some even unwittingly supported biased stereotypes. This indifference made Jamilia understand that the situation could only be changed through her own active participation and, perhaps, with the help of outside support. One night, when the rain continued to fall and the dark sky was strewn with stars, Jamilia sat for a long time at her desk in her room. Her hand glided over the paper, writing down thoughts and feelings, turning pain into lines and fear into confidence. Each sentence she wrote became a small victory over the inner demon that tried to make her doubt her own worth. In those quiet hours, filled with reflection and introspection, an idea was born. If the system was unfair, then she herself should become the engine of change. The next step was to seek help from the senior teacher, the school principal, Mr. Vladimir Sergeyevich, who had a reputation for being a man who strived for justice. Jamilia knew that one conversation with him could be a turning point, and she gathered all her courage to tell him what had happened. Later that day, she approached the principal's office. A massive oak cabinet hung in the doorway, and behind the desk sat a man with a serious look, known to many as a strict but fair man. Jamilia, slightly trembling, told her story, describing every detail of the incident, every moment of humiliation that was imprinted in her memory. Her voice, quiet and hesitant at first, gradually gained strength as she spoke of the pain she had experienced in the schoolyard and how long she had been forced to remain silent. Mr. Vladimir Sergeyevich listened attentively, his gaze sometimes softening, sometimes becoming stern. He understood that such situations could not be ignored, but the system did not always allow easy intervention in such conflicts. After Jamilia finished her story, the director promised to look into the situation, collect all the necessary evidence, and take measures to protect the rights of the student. This promise became the first ray of hope for her that her pain would not go unnoticed. In addition to formally contacting the administration, Jamilia began to seek support among her peers. She found several students who, despite their fears and concerns, expressed a desire to help. One of them, Alexander, known for his active civic position, suggested creating a small support group where everyone could openly talk about problems and look for solutions. The meetings, held in a small room in the dormitory, became a place for Jamilia to express all her emotions, get advice, and, most importantly, feel that she was not alone in this struggle. Inspired by the support, Jamilia began to actively participate in school life. She became not only a student, but also a symbol of resistance to injustice. Her diary entries, full of sincere experiences, gradually turned into a kind of manifesto, which she decided to share with others. Every time she encountered rude looks or heard mocking whispers behind her back, a determination flared up in her soul to prove that her destiny was in her own hands, and she would not allow anyone to deprive her of the right to be herself. This internal transformation became an important stage in Jamilia's life, a stage when pain and fear were replaced by a firm belief in her own strength, and dreams of change became more real with each passing day. Every step, every meeting, every conversation gave her new strength and confidence that the fight against prejudice could be the beginning of something bigger, a new era, where respect for the individual will be more important than old stereotypes and outdated prejudices. There came weeks when Jamilia's inner awakening was reflected not only in her personal experiences, but also in her active participation in the life of the school. She was no longer the timid new girl whose voice was silenced by the ridicule. She had a fire burning inside her, and she was ready to stand up for her rights and the rights of everyone who was a victim of prejudice. For several days, the school corridors were filled with a tense atmosphere of anticipation for change. Jamilia, along with a group of like-minded people, began collecting evidence of the humiliations that had occurred. They took statements from those who had witnessed the attacks, collected footage from surveillance cameras and recorded every manifestation of discrimination. These efforts did not go unnoticed. At one of the schools in St. Petersburg, known for its active discussion of social issues, talk began that something outrageous was happening inside the educational institution. A few brave students who decided not to remain silent shared their stories, and soon parents, public figures, and even journalists got involved. One of the most important events was the release of an article in a local news outlet, which described in detail cases of bias against Jamilia and other students. This article, filled with emotional testimonies and documentary evidence, became the spark that ignited the fire of public discontent. Jamilia realized that the only way to fight the system was to be open, to expose the whole truth to everyone. Together with a support group, she organized a meeting to which representatives of the school administration, teachers, and parents of students were invited. This meeting, held in the hall of a large cultural center, brought together people ready to discuss the problem of injustice. Jamilia gave a report in which she laid out all the details of the incident with her participation, showed video recordings, and talked about how long she had to endure ridicule and humiliation. Her words, filled with pain and determination, created a real sensation. There were skeptics and believers in change among those present. However, no one could deny the power with which Jamilia spoke of her experiences or the confidence that emanated from her. Everyone present understood that behind these words was more than just the story of one incident. It was a symbolic act of struggle against a system that had allowed prejudice to flourish within the walls of the school for too long. The school's leadership, realizing the scale of the problem, was forced to make the decision to formally investigate incidents involving racist remarks and physical violence. Over the next few days, the school became a place for debate, protest, and change. Despite fears of reprisals, Jamilia continued to take to the streets, giving interviews and participating in rallies calling for justice. Her story became a symbol of the fight for equality, and her name became a sign of resistance against old stereotypes. Parents of students, speaking out in support of their children, organized meetings to discuss ways to improve school life and propose concrete measures to protect students' rights. The media, as always, could not remain on the sidelines of such a high-profile case. Television broadcasts, newspapers, and online resources began to actively discuss the situation at the school. The image of Jamilia, which was initially associated with the image of a defenseless new girl, now became a symbol of determination and fortitude. Even those who had previously remained indifferent began to express support through social networks, public statements, and meetings with representatives of the administration. At that moment, it seemed that changes would not slow down their advance. Under public pressure, the school administration began to implement reforms. The rules of conduct were revised, control over discipline was strengthened, and specialists capable of not only teaching but also protecting the rights of students began to be recruited to the teaching staff. Meetings held over several weeks were followed by decisive actions, and gradually the atmosphere in the school began to change. Each step, each initiative became an important contribution to the common cause, which was now being assembled not just as a protest, but as a purposeful struggle for a future where respect for the individual would be above all else. For Jamilia, these changes meant not only a victory in a specific incident, but also a sign that her voice was heard, that her pain and suffering were not in vain. A belief was born in her soul that even in the darkest situation, you can find a ray of light if you are not afraid to tell the truth. She understood that there were still many trials ahead, but now she was sure that she was not alone. Every step she took, every initiative became a symbol of the fight for justice in a system where indifference could no longer reign with impunity. Over time, the school began to transform. The changes that had been initiated by the fight for truth soon became an integral part of the institution's daily life. The administration, recognizing the importance of supporting each student, took a series of measures aimed at creating a safe and respectful environment. Mandatory tolerance training, open discussions about equality, and constant monitoring of student behavior became the new standards. For Jamilia, this meant not only an acknowledgement of her pain, but also a new era, an era in which her individuality was valued and respected. Jamilia, having survived many trials, became an example of courage and resilience for all who faced injustice. She continued to actively participate in the life of the school, organizing meetings and roundtables where issues of equality, tolerance, and human rights were discussed. Her initiative inspired not only students, but also teachers, who realized the need for changes in traditional approaches. Now every lecture, every lesson was filled with new meaning, where discrimination and bias gave way to understanding and respect. One day, during the annual school celebration dedicated to Knowledge Day, Jamilia took the stage in front of hundreds of students, teachers, and parents. Her speech was the culmination of a long journey, from a quiet newcomer to a confident leader. She spoke about how pain can turn into strength, how every blow of fate can be turned into an opportunity for change. Her words, filled with sincerity and passion, touched the hearts of those present. "I came here," she said, "to prove that no stereotypes can determine our destiny. We all have the right to respect and dignity, and I am ready to fight for this to the end." These words caused a storm of applause, and at that moment Jamilia felt that her efforts were not in vain. Jamila's story became an example for many. The press called her the voice of change, and numerous appeals to the school administration and public discussions initiated by her speeches turned into the beginning of a long-term reform. At the same time, in the hearts of those who had previously been afraid of speaking out, confidence was born that changes are possible if you stand up for the truth even in the most difficult conditions. In the months that followed, the school became not only an educational institution, but also a place where every student could feel protected and respected. Jamilia continued to share her experiences by participating in charity projects and educational initiatives aimed at combating bias. Her life became a shining example of how even the deepest wounds can heal if given a chance, and that the power of the spirit can change not only an individual's fate, but also an entire society. The final stage of her journey came at a ceremonial meeting of the school's Board of Trustees, where, together with parents, teachers, and representatives of the administration, a decision was made to formalize new rules aimed at combating discrimination. During the meeting, Jamilia once again took to the microphone and said with a confident voice, "Today, we have taken a step towards ensuring that our walls are not filled with hatred, but with respect, not with prejudice, but with mutual understanding. Let my experience be a lesson for all of us, a lesson that we cannot allow other people's cruelty to define our lives." These words became a symbol of a new era at the school, where there was no longer room for old prejudices. For Jamilia, this moment was the culmination of a long journey, a journey filled with pain, struggle, and, finally, victory of the spirit. She realized that her strength lay not only in her ability to withstand humiliation, but also in her ability to inspire others, turning her wounds into signs of victory. A life that began with alienation and loneliness was now illuminated by the bright light of hope, and each new day promised to be better than the last. With the city lights of St. Petersburg reflected in the cold winter night, Jamilia walked the streets with her head held high. Her path was difficult, but she knew that ahead lay a future in which there would be no place for racial discrimination and indifference. Every step she took was a sign of confidence that change is possible if the fire of justice burns in the heart. Jamilia's story did not end on this stage, but began in her hearts. Her fight for equality, her determination, and strength of spirit left an indelible mark on the life of the school and on the souls of all who witnessed these changes. Her words contained not only pain, but also the joy of liberation from old chains, and now everyone who heard her voice began to believe that the future belongs to those who are not afraid to fight for their rights. Several years have passed since Jamilia Abdullah took the path of fighting for her rights and changed the face of her school. Time, like a silent but relentless artist, transformed not only the walls of the ancient building, but also the hearts of people who once silently accepted injustice. Now, looking back, one can see how a small seed of determination, sown in the cold corridors of St. Petersburg, has grown into a mighty tree of change, providing shade and comfort to those who suffered from prejudice. Much has changed in Jamilia's life. Her name has become synonymous with courage and unwavering will, and she herself has become a symbol of the fact that even the deepest wounds can be healed if you put all the strength of your soul and the desire for justice into them. She continued to work in the field of education, dedicating her life to creating an environment where every student, regardless of skin color or background, could feel part of a single whole. In her new role as a teacher and public figure, Jamilia has implemented programs aimed at nurturing respect, tolerance, and mutual understanding among young people. The school, once the scene of drama, was transformed into a model educational center where discipline and high teaching standards were combined with warmth and attention to each student. The administration of the institution continued to conduct regular trainings on intercultural communication, and history, literature, and art classes became a place for open dialogue about the problems of racism and bias. In this renewed space, the memory of a past filled with pain and humiliation served as a powerful reminder that change is possible if you fight for it. Not only the school, but the entire city of St. Petersburg gradually responded to the call for justice. Journalists, public figures, and even government officials began to pay more attention to the problems of discrimination, attracting experts and organizing forums where ways to overcome social barriers were discussed. New initiatives aimed at preserving diversity and developing a tolerant society emerged in the city's cultural life. Each event, each exhibition, and conference became a kind of bridge between the past, where injustice reigned, and the future, where mutual respect and equality reign. A period of inner peace and harmony began in Jamila's personal life. The pain of those years when her hair was a symbol of humiliation turned into an echo of the past, which she managed to overcome, becoming stronger and wiser. Her eyes no longer reflected sadness, but shone with confidence that the fight for truth and dignity is never in vain. Meeting with former classmates who now themselves sought to change outdated views, she found understanding and sincere gratitude. Her story became a lesson for many generations, reminding that every person has the right to be heard, that true greatness lies in the ability to forgive and move forward, despite all the trials. Over the years, the memory of those events became an important part of not only the personal, but also the collective memory of the school and the city. Photographs, CCTV footage, the first diary entries, all of this became part of the exhibition of the new Museum of the History of Education in St. Petersburg, where visitors could learn how one girl changed the course of events, turning her pain into a force for change. The exhibition became a symbol of the fight for justice, an example of how a small flame can flare up into a fire capable of illuminating even the darkest corners of society. Despite recognition and respect, Jamilia always remained modest and attentive to others. She understood that every victory is only an intermediate stage on the path to creating a better world, where the values of love, honesty, and mutual respect will prevail. Her speeches, publications in magazines, and active participation in public discussions became a beacon for those who were still looking for answers to questions about justice and equality. The story of her life, filled with overcoming, struggle, and triumph of the spirit, became not just a story about the past, but a living example of how to change the world for the better. The epilogue of this story is not the end, but only a quiet whisper that change is possible if you believe in it. It is a reminder that every new meeting, every word of support, and every sincere smile is a small step towards a great future where there is no place for bias and injustice. Jamilia Abdullah has become a symbol of the fact that the power of spirit can overcome any barriers, and the memory of the past can become a solid foundation for building a bright and fair world. Thus, Jamilia's story is an invitation to all of us to be bolder, to love deeper, to fight for the truth, and not to forget that even the most difficult trials can become the beginning of a great change if the fire of faith and hope burns in the heart.